Guess I better use the mic. And then if you guys see me not using the mic today, definitely call me out on it, because I'll find myself slowly lowering that down. Okay. And before I get started, I just want to make sure I got this.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Okay.
It's always the technology question.
Yeah, and then one more button to press, and we are rolling. Okay. So, like the introduction said, I'm Boone Zimmerly. I work for Deschutes County as the Fire Adapted Communities Coordinator. It's a mouthful of a title, right? But if you're familiar with Project Wildfire, Fire Free, the Fire Free drop-off stuff, that's kind of me. I'm the director of Project Wildfire, and then also coordinate that Fire Free stuff. And I thought what I'd do today is kind of talk through a larger overview, dive a little bit into the home defensible space, and then kind of conclude there and open up for questions. But that title, Fire Adapted Communities Coordinator, pretty big title, you know, but when we think about it, a lot of people often imagine that as some kind of a checklist or something that we do. But the real reality is we live in a fire-dependent ecosystem, right? So when we look out on the landscape, often we see fires during the summer, we see fires returning all the time. And there's a lot of pieces to living in a fire-adapted community. It's not just the piece of the fire-wise, but it's also those larger pieces of what the Forest Service is doing out there to prepare the lands, what's going on with our protection side of things, what are all of our partners doing as far as ODF or any of those other protection departments, and then also when we kind of zoom in a little bit, we get to the point of the piece of the resident mitigation, and that's where our fire-wise falls into it. And just to kind of frame up where we live and that piece of being in a fire-dependent ecosystem, here, I'm going to stand to the side. I'm having a hard time figuring out where to stand right now. But as we, you know, this picture up here is we kind of start off the crest of the Cascades, and then we work out until we're coming down in elevation. And as we come down in elevation and move out, we're seeing how the fire frequency changes. Fire frequency meaning like how often that fire is returning on the landscape or what it naturally would return. And then the severity of those fires, like how hot or how intense they're burning from a high to a low, but we're going from a longer term to a shorter term. You know, we put the star on here of Bend just because everybody's familiar with where Bend sits. And we're, you know, down here on Caldera Springs, Sunriver area, we're right in the peak of, or right in that transition, just a little bit above Bend, a few hundred feet above them for elevation. But it still puts us in a short return frequency, so the fire frequency is really short. So often we would have fires, and then our severity of those fires would be low. So when we look out at our ecosystem and our forest type, we're in a dry pine site. Dry pine sites usually, you know, all the studies here in Central Oregon show that we would naturally have fire every 15 years on the landscape, and it'd be a low intensity fire. So it'd be burning off the grass and the brush underneath the pines, and the pines would be persisting. This table here, this picture, the map here is kind of shows what we've got as far as our fire frequency and what's on the landscape. First, we're going to talk through this chart, though. So this is the last 100 years of fires by decade and the number of acres burned. And we see this big spike back in 1910. In 1910, there was lots of fires in the western states. There were books written about it, the Big Burn and whatnot. So those fires really changed our policy of what we're doing on the landscape as far as managing those fires. And we formed quite a few agencies, quite a few protection divisions, and we ended up with suppression. We were suppressing those fires, and we're doing it really well, year after year, decade after decade. And then all of a sudden, boom, we begin to have a little bit more acres, and more acres, and more acres, and more acres. And you know, the real big contributing factor to that is the lack of the fire return interval and the ingrowth in our vegetation, especially when we look across Central Oregon. So the dry pine sites would normally have a fire return interval of every 15 years. So the fire would be on that same piece of ground every 15 years or so. They say 5 to 30, and I say 15. There's a study, a researcher just finished it a few years ago, but he was saying it's more like 13 on the nose, and there's hardly any variation from that 13. So 15 is an easy number to remember. But when we look at where we're living and where we're at, right, this is 100 years of fire. So every one of these shapes, these polygons out here, is a fire shape. But we don't see those across every acre, even within 100 years. And what I'm all adding this up to is we have a fire deficit, we're having these more intense fires, and we're having a harder and harder time of managing these fires, right? And ultimately, the thing is we're not going to exclude fire in the landscape. It's going to happen. It's not a matter of if, it's when it's going to happen. And it's how prepared are we going to be when it does happen. So I'm going to breeze through this pretty quick. We got two triangles. One is just to have combustion at all. And then the other one is how does that fire behave? So you got to have oxygen, heat, and fuel to have fire. And then the way that it's going to behave out there, how intense it will burn, depends on weather, topography, and the fuel. So fuel is the common theme between the two. And fuel is our vegetation, right? So when we look out on the landscape, I know it's kind of washed out in this picture, but it's pretty easy to look at this and you see juniper trees, some pines mixed in, quite a bit of bitter brush. It's easy to see how much fuel we have there. But oftentimes what's really hard is turning around, looking at our own home and recognizing the same fuel. And I acknowledge this picture is not from your community, but it's one that was in the slide, so I continue to use it. But when a firefighter looks at this, they see the same things. They see the fuel loading beneath the trees. They see those ladder fuels, places where fire would climb from the ground into the trees and torching trees and raining embers out onto the home. And I probably should have said this up front. Number one cause of home ignition is ember fallout. So we worry about what is happening right around our homes, where those sources of embers are coming from, and then where they're landing. Are they landing on decks or pine needles that are up against the decks? Or maybe stuff that's inside the gutters that may ignite the home as well. So we want to be thinking about changing that fuel. And we want to think about that fire coming across the landscape, what it's doing out here. Maybe it's throwing some embers up and it's starting little fires ahead of itself. But when we hit our 100-foot zone, we've altered the fuels in that zone where we don't have the ladder fuels. We don't have all the places for that fire to climb from the ground into the crown to be an ignition or an ember source. And then when we get into that 5 to 30, that should be the places that we pretty much know every plant that grows around our home within the 5 to 30, right? It's going to be stuff that we've selected that is fire resistant, doesn't readily burn. Maybe we've got some lawn or some rock mixed in there. But the fire, if it were to occur there, it would have a hard time spreading, and it's definitely not torching trees. And then we get to the last little 0 to 5, which is the final disconnect to our home. Like within that 0 to 5, it's commonly referred to as the non-combustible zone. It's usually a zone that we don't want to put bark mulch into that. Bark mulch is very fine particles. When you really pick it up and look at it, fine particles, lights really easy, puts off very, very small flames generally. And then oftentimes it can sit and smolder and go unnoticed. And we've got a lot of examples of that around Central Oregon. But we want to have that final disconnect where the fire, when it hits that 0 to 5, it no longer has anything to burn, and it doesn't ignite our home. And the other side of our home, the thing that we want to think about is what have we done to prepare? What are the annual maintenance things like cleaning our gutters, cleaning the needles off, moving our lawn furniture when we're on vacation? Lawn furniture, a lot of people don't recognize it, but lawn furniture often is quite flammable. You leave out those chairs with the cushions. You take off for the weekend, a fire happens, and lo and behold, you've left this source of fire or a place for embers to land and ignite. So we want to think about cleaning stuff off like that. Hanging baskets are also another one. So fire-wise is... and I'd love to go to this link, but it would take a while and detour us. But this is a story map. Story maps kind of walk through just about any kind of subject. But this one will walk through all of our communities within Deschutes County. Firewise gives us that structure to be able to reach into those individual residents, that resident mitigation that we saw earlier. Firewise is that piece where we're able to engage the community and then work all the way down to the individual resident. So Firewise, we're quite proud of Firewise in Deschutes County. We've been one of the first states to really embrace it, and we've gone a long ways with it. Right now, across all of the nation, we rank number 6 for a number of sites. Over the time that we've been doing Firewise, I think we've got over $9 million have been invested by the communities, not just by us. We invest some money into that stuff to keep everything moving, but the communities themselves have invested $9 million. And I believe last year alone was 2 million of that. And our numbers have really shot up in the last couple of years, given all the fires that have been happening on the west side of the state. But FireWise is that kind of community engagement. Everybody kind of steps in. If you end up with time, I would definitely encourage you to go to the link. It's got a nice map in there. It takes you around to the different communities, talks about what kind of things they've been doing over the years, what kind of activities and stuff. Okay. And I feel like I ran through that really fast.
Which is okay. Thank you.
Okay. And then I just want to throw up a few websites there if you're interested in more of this. There's Project Wildfire.
We'll be sharing this with everyone. If you
Okay.
Just note that.
Okay, yeah. And then, as Kathy said, this will all be getting shared out, so you'll be able to find all of these links and stuff. There's several there. There's Project Wildfire, the Fire Free with the dates, FireWise, learn more about the program, and then Central Oregon Fire, which is a great site to keep you informed about the smoke during fire season and prescribed fire season. So that's what I've got. I ran through that pretty quick. I recognize that.
Thank you, Boone.
Yeah.
Do we have any questions? Anybody got any questions for Boone?
No questions, for real?
These guys are pretty FireWise savvy.
Yeah.
They're pretty good.
And if you got hard questions, I'll make up the answers. So, yeah.
Do they have any sites open for dropping off free
Yeah. Yeah, so the Fire Free starts May 31st and runs all the way through into June 4th. For Southern Deschutes County, for the transfer station out on 97, I believe that opens on...
Kelly's going to send all that out to you. We've actually got an email going out to all the owners because we're doing the chipping day in front of people's houses, and we're going to send out the dates that the compost site up in Sunriver is open, and then the transfer station down south. So we'll be sharing all that with you.
Yeah, awesome. June 14th.
Yeah.
Or May 14th.
May 14th.
Is when it opens, yeah.
Anybody else? No? Yes, one more.
We have a big one that's within the 10-foot zone, and in the big storm we had, half of it broke off and landed in our hot tub area, but the remainder of it, which is 25, 30 feet high, is still there. Would that be then just cut it off altogether?
Yeah. You know, that's a...
There's a little bit of brush at the top that was still there and maybe growing.
Yeah. And all of them, you know, generally the generic answer is it depends, but I can give you some rules of thumb, right? It's pretty easy when we look at a large tree out there and think like, man, look at all the fuel up there. It's big, right? But the important piece always to bring it back to is how would that tree catch on fire? So ponderosa pines generally have a really thick bark that insulates them from fire, and in their branches they do kind of self-pruning where they lose the lower branches because what they want that low intensity fire to move through. So it's generally pretty hard to ignite the tree if there's no fuel underneath it. And I think to your question, you're kind of asking like, what about the tree? It's been compromised now that something's come off of it. You know, that part of it is you need to have someone come out and take a look at it in case it blows over in another windstorm. From a fire standpoint, if you've got all of the brush removed from underneath the drip line around it, you know, so directly underneath the tree, and there's no way for that fire to move from the ground into the crown, you're all right. Yeah. Generally, yeah, okay, yep. And those large trees, I guess we'll throw one more thing out with those large trees, you know, because I feel like everybody believes I'm going to tell them they have to cut down all the trees around their home, and that's definitely not true. Those large trees, they provide a couple functions for us around our home when it comes to wildfire. As long as you've got all the brush removed underneath it, they're not going to ignite, but that large tree is also acting as a screen for any embers that are coming towards your home. So they won't readily ignite from embers landing in them. But your home will, because they've got dead needles and stuff in the gutters or whatever if you're not up on your maintenance. So it's screening it. And then the other one, like it literally is shading your house. So when we're out on a fire and we're calculating probability of ignition, so the probability of an ember landing somewhere and igniting the fuel, one of the inputs is shade. So if your tree is shading your home, it's decreasing that probability of ignition as well. So it's adding a couple different functions. And I think the biggest one is screening the home from the embers. If you really dissect some of those pictures from some of those recent fires that ran through communities, you're going to begin to see the common theme that it's not the tree that burned the house down, it's the house that burned the tree down. The trees will be scorched on the side that the house was at. They might end up even, and then oftentimes things are not scorched because the tree was there, but But usually it's the tree bringing the house down and not it's usually the house bringing the tree down, not the tree bringing the house down. Definitely don't want to say that backwards.
We're gonna stop just because we've got another presentation here. So we have lots of information about all this stuff. All those websites will be sent to all of you, and Boone's presentation has been recorded. So we're gonna turn it over to David Walker. Actually, I need to pull up your presentation, don't I? Let's get you.
Thank you, Kathy. While she's getting that pulled up, I work over at the Sunriver Nature Center. I do the grounds and maintenance out there. I've been working in ecological restoration for the past, over 15 years now. And so native plants are my forte. With native plants comes invasive species. And I would say the majority of what I do isn't doing what I want to do, which is planting native plants. It's pulling out invasive species. And since a lot of you guys are in a new community, new housing, newish housing, the impacts of that have probably brought in some invasive species. Working with the Sunriver Resort for the past few years, I know that it is a major problem, and if you let it get out of hand, it is uncontrollable. And so, yeah, we'll jump into this real quick, and I apologize.
Can you share the screen, please?
We cannot. I'm not sure who's on the line. We'll be sharing this presentation after the meeting. If you're on the phone, we're not going to be sharing the presentation.
And I'll apologize from the start, get it out of the way. I'm not a great speaker. I mumble. I work with plants all the time. I'm in the ground. I work by myself. And this just makes my mumbling even louder, so I'm sorry.
All right. On that note, we
Okay.
should be able to get to there. See how it goes.
Let's see, can we get back? There we go. Start it off. Why I put this picture up on the screen is because I think we all moved here for, well, probably a similar reason. It's beautiful. It's hard to find greener pastures. This place is gorgeous. So part of that beauty comes from the native landscapes. If any of you guys have gone on a hike here, which I hope you have, I can almost guarantee you've seen some of the prettiest stuff that you've ever seen. It's gorgeous here. I've had the opportunity to travel the world, and I'm here. So I wanted to pull up what our goals are because we all have similar missions. Whether you live in Sunriver, whether you live in Caldera, whether it's all the same. The goal was to create communities where we coexist with nature. Most communities out here, if you drive through Bend, you see a lot of this. There'll be a whole bunch of aspen trees out there. Construction comes through, they rip out all the aspen trees, build 500 homes, and call it Aspen Ridge. There's no longer an aspen tree there, but And so we got Tamarack Village, we got Snowberry Village, we got all those things, and there's not a snowberry bush out there. So what Sunriver did started off many years ago, and what Caldera is doing is on the same lines. These are both from Caldera's website and Sunriver's website, and I'm not going to read them because they're up there. But essentially what they're saying is we want to live with nature. Now, living with nature is a very tricky process. And you kind of have to prioritize things, and Boone knows really well that fires are probably our biggest concern out here. And living in a sorry, words are not my greatest thing, but an ecosystem that requires fire is a really difficult task. How to manage that and work your way through that is very difficult. And I think we've done a really good job out here. I'd say that based off of there being no fires, that we've done pretty well. But as you saw the chart, it's going up and there's more and more. So again, living with nature is really tricky. And so one of the tricky aspects, other than fires, is dealing with our vegetation. So I push native plants all the time. Not to say that you can't plant beautiful, I don't know, whatever they're called, that yellow flower, the lily, whatever you like that's not native. I'm not saying don't plant them. I am saying there are perks to planting native plants, and there's a lot specifically for this area. If any of you guys have tried gardening here, I'm sure it's ended with probably some more disasters than wherever the last place you lived, unless that was at the top of a mountain somewhere. Our soil is hardly soil, it's pumice, and we get no water, and sometimes we get frosts in the middle of July. Yeah, those tomatoes, gone. Yeah, awesome. So when dealing with natives, they're adapted to our soil, the nutrient levels in our soil, the precipitation amounts that we have here, the weird, bizarre patterns. I don't know if anyone's looked at NOAA over the last few days, but we have anywhere from, I think they're saying 3 to 8 inches of snow in the next 3 days. And it was 80 or 75 a day ago. So imagine yourself being a plant and trying to figure that out. You're starting germination, and then all of a sudden you have 3 inches of snow on you. It just is really hard to grow anything here, especially if you come over from the west side of the Cascades or California, or I used to throw out seeds or compost, and then stuff would sprout from the compost. That's not going to happen here. All those characteristics translate to decreased water use, which I know is a huge issue here. I don't know if any of you guys have seen the recent studies on drought in this area, but it's severe. And we don't have a plan for it to get better. So saving money on water is always a great thing. You don't need fertilizers for your native plants. They're adapted to this. It doesn't hurt to put some stuff on them, but you don't need anywhere near what you would be putting on for sod and stuff like that. And then there's also the increased ability to withstand drought, heat, cold temperatures. A lot of our native plants are fire resistant. They have, Boone talked about ponderosas. If you've seen any of the old photos, I think the Homestead has some old photos posted of this area. I know Starbucks does. There's been presentations on it. This was a beautiful old growth ponderosa forest. And it's not anymore. So as opposed to complaining about it, we got to figure out how to live with it. And so native plants do a really good job of helping us adapt to all of the issues that we face here as far as fire and drought and whatnot. In addition to all that, part of that connection that we get with nature comes from those native plants. It's habitat for pollinators, birds, and wildlife. And I think, again, that is part of why these communities were developed, is because we wanted to work with those things and see those beautiful elk that have been out at the airport for the past 2 months or 3 months or so, and have that deer running through your yard. That's stuff that, I still love when there's a deer running through one of the roundabouts here, and you'll see this car from California or Washington just stop, and they'll stare at it, and I go, oh man, it's a deer. What are you doing? We got tons of them here, But it makes me sit back and realize, well, not everyone gets this. We're spoiled, and part of why we have that is because half the people here feed them. No, it's because we have a beautiful landscape, and the deer thrive here, or they can. So again, I touched on this briefly before. With new construction comes a lot of negative impacts. There's a lot of positives as well, but there are a lot of negative impacts for as far as our soil and our invasive species go. So when you do start removing soil and adding soil, you're actually getting rid of a lot of the fungi. And to most people, you don't see this fungi. Unless you got your hands in the dirt and you're checking stuff out and you know what you're looking for, you're not going to see some of the most important fungi out there. And so when you get rid of that top 2 inches of that soil, you're actually disturbing a ton of different, very, very effective ways of making stuff grow. And so then on top of that, you got all the tractors out there, and you start compacting the ground, and you can't dig in it anymore because it's so darn tough. And then on top of that, you just put this big structure up that creates shade where there's no longer shade and sun, and then you throw out irrigation, and so now it's just this complete process. And a lot of times, again, on top of that, people bring in soil, and rock and stuff like that, and I have had so much clean dirt brought in, and somehow magically in that clean dirt, whatever that means, there's seeds in there. There's invasive species that are in there. And so what we're doing when we put up all this construction is we are creating the optimal environment for invasive species to thrive. We've voided the soil of a complete nutrients. So it usually is very high in one particular nutrients, and that's where weeds thrive in. They're actually doing something really good, but we don't like that. And we don't have the time to let them do what they're doing. So one of the biggest questions that I get asked is what do all these things mean? Okay, so a weed is pretty basic. It's a plant growing where it is not wanted. Invasive species is different from noxious. When you're driving around town, you'll see a lot of things that say keep noxious weeds out. And then you'll hear some more literature or read some more literature and it'll say invasive, and it gets a little complicated. Invasive species is a plant that has the ability to thrive and spread aggressively outside of its natural range. Right? And then noxious is a legal declaration made by the legislature for those species determined to be detrimental to the environment or dangerous to humans or livestock. So all noxious species are invasive, but not all invasive species are noxious. They're both bad. We don't want either of them. Because we live in Deschutes County, and Deschutes County is a rural community still, I mean, it's definitely changing, but there's still a lot of farms and ranches around here. Our legal declarations, what is noxious, is really, really important because people's lives depend on the Timothy hay they're growing, the mint, the carrot, the lavender, those sorts of things. And when they get their fields full of weeds, they can no longer sell their Timothy hay as weed-free, and they run into all these different issues, and now our livelihoods are on the line. So we tend to work off of Deschutes County's noxious weed program because it is very comprehensive, and it's very strict, and it makes sense. It's easy to work through. So the problem of noxious non-native weeds proliferating in Central Oregon is severe. Noxious weeds overrun native vegetation, destroy natural animal habitat, shelter undesirable insects, steal scarce water, infest crops, and cost local communities in terms of visual blight, a reduction of property values, and lost agricultural dollars. Some noxious weeds are poisonous to humans, livestock, and wildlife. I'll let you guys finish the rest. I used to hate when my professors would just read their slides, and now I'm up here reading my slides, and I realize it's more for me and not as much for you. I got to stay on track. So the next part is Deschutes County mission, and this is, we're kind of all part of the same mission. It's working cooperatively to promote and implement noxious weed control in Deschutes County, to contain existing weed populations and eradicate new invaders, to raise the value of the land economically and biologically, to improve the health of the community, promote stewardship, preserve natural resources, and provide examples and leadership for other counties and states in effective vegetative management. Sorry, that's a mouthful. But it goes beyond just your property, is what I was trying to get at by posting these things. What you do on your property affects your community. So in order to be a good community member, you really got to work on your property and making sure that the invasive species are off of your property. And these next slides will kind of show why. And I'm not going to read the whole thing, but these are some of our big ones that we deal with. And like I said, I'll get into more in the next slide because there's a couple little tidbits on there that show why it's so important that you manage these. But this is a big one. We live close to a river, so there are marshes and swamps and stuff like that out here. And so Canada thistle and bull thistle are two big ones that you'll see a lot of out here. And they're no fun. They're no fun to get rid of because if you go out and hand pull them, they're just going to come back even stronger. And on top of that, when you are hand pulling them, your hands are going to hurt. You're going to get little prickly things in them. I don't care what gloves you got on. If they're too thick of gloves, then you can't pull them out because you don't have any dexterity. And if they're too thin of gloves, then pulling weeds is awesome. So what is recommended for these? What I've had the most success with is actually mowing them down. And so the idea behind that is you can't just do it once. You have to continually stay on top of it. And what that does is it depletes the energy resources for Canada and bull thistle. We do a war on weeds every year, and we'll have volunteers go out and they start pulling all the bull thistle and stuff. And all that means is that I have to go out a month or two later and pull 3 times as much bull thistle because it just, when you do that, when you take off the top and you can't get the whole root, it sends all of the nutrients back through those roots and they start sprouting more and more Canada thistles. So if you do get them really early and you can see them really early, you can have some success pulling them by hand. But again, like all weeds, the best thing you can possibly do is be proactive and get things early. The removal techniques on here are more for established stuff on your property, but if you can get to any of these when you first see them, pull them, get them out of the ground, and as always, get the whole root out. So sometimes that means getting the shovel out and digging a little bit deeper. So spotted knapweed's a big one out here. I know I have a couple buddies in Lapine who they garden, they weed constantly, and they're just not, it's never going to happen. They're always going to have this. There's no way that they can get rid of it because they let it go too long. And this is what I was talking about a little bit earlier. Plants average about 1,000 seeds per plant. That's not a big number. They get bigger. Wait for the next slide. Okay. So again, being proactive about this, getting them when they're still very soft. When the soil is moist, the plants can be pulled. After that, they're going to bolt before they flower, typically from May to June. The roots will break off and will resprout, so consider digging if necessary. Again, I walk around, I have a hori that I walk around with. They're called dig-digs also. They're just soil knives. You'll see them online. They range anywhere from, I've seen them for $15 all the way to $300 for some custom-made one. But all they are is a little knife that's about that long, and it's great for planting as well as digging up stuff. It's really sharp, so if you need to cut twine, anything like that, couldn't recommend it more. It's a lot less of a pain than dealing with a little shovel and stuff. Sometimes these just don't work as well. And spotted knapweed is a great candidate for it. One thing that I hear all the time with spotted knapweed is, how can it be a weed? It's so pretty. I'm not even going to dignify that with a response. It's a weed. It's pretty has nothing to do with how noxious something or invasive something is. It's pushing out something that should be here. Yeah. So it doesn't matter where you're from. You've seen this guy. You might not know what you're looking at. You might think it's beautiful. It is one of the worst species of noxious weeds out there as far as how prolific it is. It is everywhere. I've worked with biologists on this, guys who have devoted their entire life to getting rid of cheatgrass. The answer is no longer have cattle go anywhere, no longer have people go anywhere, don't ever move, stay in a box, and you'll get rid of it eventually. It's not going to happen. A lot of places are considering calling it a naturalized species like juniper and just throwing it off the list at this point because it's impossible to get rid of. That being said, that's on a mass scale. In our own homes, it is very possible to get rid of it, and that is what we can do to contribute to its demise in this area. The reason why it's called cheatgrass is because it's a winter annual. Right? So it germinates in the fall and grows rapidly until cold temperatures arrive, and then it puts down all of its seeds. So before any other plants have even started growing, it's already got its seeds in the ground. So there's two ways of getting rid of it. One is pulling it, and when you are pulling any of these things, try to do it before they go to seed. If they are already in seed, walk around with a little bag so that it goes directly into the bag, and try not to shake them up and everything like that, because then you're just spreading the seeds and you're going to have more work the next year. But the way that I've had good luck dealing with cheatgrass in really large amounts is actually out-competing it. And there happens to be a grass that is native that grows well here called sandberg bluegrass, and it is also a winter annual. And you will notice, if you look up sandberg bluegrass, you'll notice when you start recognizing it that there will be tons of cheatgrass, and in the patches where the sandbergs are, there's no cheatgrass, even disturbed. So this method takes longer. That's for sure. A lot of times you need to help it out and remove the cheatgrass and do it over time and get rid of the seed bank as well. But there is hope as far as our individual properties for managing cheatgrass. This is the one I was talking about. A single plant produced up to 500,000 seeds. So if you think 1,000 seeds from a spotted knapweed was a big deal, yeah. These guys are horrible. So working with Sunriver, the resort actually has a policy on these guys. If you see Dalmatian toadflax anywhere in the resort, don't pull it, you call them, and they come out and deal with it. And this is one of those plants where, I hate saying this, but chemicals might need to come into play. If you can dig it out all the way and you can get every last little bit of root, go to town. Otherwise, what I have success with, again, I hate saying this because I do not advocate using Roundup, but I use a little vial, and I chop the top right down to the ground, and I just do a little drop of the Roundup right on it, and I've had really good success with that. It's hard for me to say that, but I don't know how to get rid of this any other way. It is, again, that 500,000 seeds scares the bejesus out of me. That's a lot of seeds, and that's a seed bank that, that's a lot of years of those coming back over and over and over again. And I wrote, pulling or digging large established plants will be unsuccessful. It's just not going to happen. But you can prevent seed development. That's another way of working through this issue. Is if you do cut them before they go to seed, Yeah, they're still there. Yeah, they're going to come back, but you're not adding to the problem. Russian thistle, again, 200,000 seeds. You guys probably know this as tumbleweed. Tumbleweed's not native. I'll give you a little story here. I worked for a company in town that worked with the movie Wild. I think it had Reese Witherspoon in it, and we did a whole set for them, and they stayed at our place and stuff. And this big old tractor trailer, 18-wheeler, pulls up into this little tiny nursery that I worked at, and they open up the back, and it's full of tumbleweed. And we look at them and go, get this thing off of the property. We are a native plant nursery. Do you understand? And the director goes, no, this is the West. This is what grows out here. This is the Wild West. This is what we want in our scene. It's a desert. And go, no, that's not quite right. I can almost guarantee you, no one on the PCT is seeing much tumbleweed up through here, and native tumbleweed through here, and we don't want to see that at our nursery. It is very easy to pull out. But one of the bigger issues is people oftentimes don't recognize what it looks like until it's in tumbleweed form, and then we've all seen westerns and stuff, so we know exactly what that is. And then once you grab it, the little seeds start going everywhere. That's why it's such a great cedar, because they're so good at popping out and going everywhere. And that process of you grabbing it, you just spread a whole bunch of seeds. So again, when taking care of tumbleweeds, it's okay to grab the ones that are already established if they're out there and everything, because they are a fire hazard. They're a big fire hazard. They pile up on fences and stuff, and they're dry brush. So just make sure you have a bag to put them in, and they get hauled off to the dump and composted and broken down in those giant piles if you've ever seen them out there, and they're hot enough to break down all the seeds and everything in there. And if you do read through all this, I believe it'll all be available.
We need to.
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, you're in luck. There.
All right, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put out your contact information.
Yeah.
And if anybody has questions, we're going to give you David's contact information directly.
Sweet.
Because we have in Caldera cheatgrass, Russian thistle, all the lovely knapweeds. So we're happy to have you share your knowledge with the owners. So thank you so much.